The morning sun was barely up when Richard felt his phone buzzing on the nightstand. He grabbed it with one hand while rubbing his tired eyes with the other. Another message from the housekeeping agency. His heart sank before he even read it. Mr. Harrison, we regret to inform you that Mrs. Patterson will not be returning. She cited personal reasons and has requested immediate release from her contract. Richard dropped the phone on his chest and stared at the ceiling. That made 15. 15 maids in less than 2 years. Each one had arrived with confidence, armed with years of experience and glowing references. Each one had left defeated, usually within a month. Some lasted only a week. He heard the familiar sound of small feet running down the hallway, followed by a door slamming. His daughter was awake, 7 years old, with her mother's dark curls and bright green eyes, but lately all he saw in those eyes was anger. Richard pulled himself out of bed and headed downstairs. The kitchen was already a disaster zone. Cereal was scattered across the marble countertops, milk dripped onto the floor, and his daughter sat in the middle of it all, arms crossed with that look on her face, the look that said she was daring him to say something. "Good morning, sweetie," he tried, keeping his voice calm. "I hate cornflakes," she announced, kicking her legs against the chair. "They're disgusting." "You loved cornflakes yesterday," Richard reminded her gently. "Remember? You asked Mrs. Patterson to buy the chocolate ones specially." "Well, I hate them now." Richard took a deep breath and started cleaning up the mess. He was wearing his suit already, had an important meeting at 9, and his company's biggest investor was flying in from overseas. But right now he was on his hands and knees wiping up milk with paper towels. "Daddy has to go to work soon," he said, trying to sound upbeat. "But I'll make you some toast before I leave, okay?" "I don't want toast. I don't want anything." This had become their morning routine. His daughter would create chaos, refuse everything, and Richard would scramble to fix things before rushing to the office, already exhausted before his workday even began. He remembered when mornings used to be different. When his wife was alive, their kitchen had been filled with laughter. His daughter would help make pancakes, getting flour all over her nose, and they'd all sit together, talking about nothing and everything. But that was before. Before the car accident. Before his world had collapsed into this strange, painful reality, where he had more money than he could ever spend but couldn't figure out how to help his own child. The doorbell rang. Richard glanced at his watch. The agency had said they'd send someone to discuss the situation, but he hadn't expected them this early. "Stay here, sweetheart," he told his daughter, though she was already ignoring him, pushing cereal around the table with her finger. He opened the door to find Janet from the Elite Household Services standing there with her usual professional smile, though it looked a bit strained today. "Mr. Harrison," she greeted him. "May I come in?" They sat in his home office, a room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the garden that nobody tended anymore. The roses his wife had planted were wild and overgrown now. "I'll be direct," Janet said, setting her tablet on the desk. "We're in a difficult position. Mrs. Patterson was one of our most experienced professionals. She's handled children from royal families, celebrity households, and high-net-worth individuals around the world. If she couldn't manage the situation here, I'm not sure who can." Richard felt his chest tighten. "Are you saying you won't send anyone else?" "I'm saying we need to be realistic about expectations. Your daughter is clearly going through something significant. Have you considered that maybe what she needs isn't another housekeeper, but perhaps professional help? A child therapist?" "I've tried," Richard said, his voice rough. "I've taken her to 3 different therapists. She refuses to talk to any of them, just sits there in silence for the entire hour, or throws things or hides under the chair." Janet nodded sympathetically. Children process grief differently than adults. The loss of her mother at such a young age, it's bound to manifest in challenging behaviors. "I know that," Richard snapped, then immediately regretted his tone. "I'm sorry. I just don't know what else to do. I've cut back my hours at work as much as I can. I've bought her everything she asks for. I've tried being patient, I've tried being firm, I've tried everything. Have you considered taking more time off? Being present yourself instead of relying on hired help?" The suggestion hit him like a punch to the gut because he'd thought about it constantly. But his company was at a critical stage. They were about to launch a new product that would either make them industry leaders or cause everything to collapse. His investors were breathing down his neck. His board was watching his every move. "I have responsibilities," he said quietly. "Hundreds of employees depend on the company's success. If I step away now, everything my wife and I built together could fall apart. Janet was silent for a moment. Then she picked up her tablet and scrolled through something. There is one more person I could send, she said slowly. Though I'll be honest, she's not our typical placement. What do you mean? Her name is Diana Cooper. She's 52 years old and her background is unusual. She used to be a child psychologist, actually had her own practice for nearly 20 years. But she went through some personal difficulties a few years ago and lost her license. She's been doing housekeeping work since then, though she's never lasted long in any position. Richard frowned. Why not? If she has all that training with children, why does she keep leaving jobs?
She doesn't leave.
She gets fired. The family say she's too involved, crosses boundaries, questions parenting decisions. One family accused her of being insubordinate when she suggested they were pushing their child too hard in competitive sports. Another said she was unprofessional because she cried when she had to discipline a child. She sounds like a disaster, Richard said flatly. On paper, yes. But something tells me she might be exactly what your daughter needs. Someone who sees her as more than just a job. Someone who actually understands what she's going through. Richard wanted to say no. Wanted to tell Janet to find someone normal. Someone professional, someone who wouldn't cause more problems. But as he sat there in his office with his daughter probably destroying something else in the kitchen, he realized he was out of options. Fine, he said, send her. But this is the last chance. If this doesn't work, I'll have to figure something else out. Janet stood up, relief evident on her face. I'll have her here tomorrow morning. And Mr. Harrison, I really do hope this works out, for your daughter's sake. After Janet left, Richard went back to the kitchen. His daughter had moved to the living room and was pulling books off the shelves, letting them fall in piles on the floor. He opened his mouth to scold her, then closed it again. What was the point? She'd just ignore him anyway. His phone rang. His assistant calling about the meeting he was already late for. I'll be there in 30 minutes, he promised, though he had no idea how he'd make that happen. He tried to pick up his daughter to carry her upstairs and get her dressed for the day, but she went rigid in his arms, screaming and kicking until he had to put her down. I hate you, she yelled, her face red. I hate you, and I hate this house, and I hate everything. The words pierced him, even though he knew she didn't really mean them. Or maybe she did. Maybe he'd failed her so completely that hate was all she had left. His sister had told him once that he was trying to buy his daughter's happiness, that he showered her with toys and clothes and electronics because it was easier than dealing with the real problem. The real problem being that they'd both lost someone irreplaceable, and no amount of money or maids or busy schedules would fill that hole. By the time Richard finally made it to the office, he'd missed the morning meeting entirely. His assistant had covered for him, but the investor had noticed his absence. Richard spent the rest of the day trying to salvage the situation, making promises and projections, all while his mind kept drifting back home. He wondered what his daughter was doing. If she was eating, if she was safe. He'd hired a temporary babysitter for the day, a college student who'd worked for them before. The girl was sweet, but terrified of his daughter's outbursts. When Richard finally got home that evening, just after 8, the babysitter met him at the door with tears in her eyes. I'm so sorry. Mr. Harrison, she said quickly. I can't do this again. She locked herself in her room for 3 hours. She wouldn't eat anything. She told me she hoped I'd die. I know she's just a kid, but I can't handle it. Richard paid her extra and apologized, then climbed the stairs to his daughter's room. The door was locked from the inside. He knocked gently. Sweetheart, it's Daddy. Can you open the door? Silence, please, honey. I brought dinner. Your favorite from that Italian place. More silence, then finally a small voice. Go away. Richard slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor outside her door. This had become another routine. Him on one side, her on the other. A locked door between them like a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. I know you're hurting, he said softly. I know you miss Mommy. I miss her too. Every single day. He heard something that might have been crying, but he couldn't be sure. There's a new person coming tomorrow. Her name is Diana. Maybe she'll be better than the others. Maybe she'll understand you better. I don't want anyone, came the reply, muffled. I want Mommy. Richard's eyes burned with tears he wouldn't let fall. I know, baby. I know. He stayed there for another hour, talking to her through the door about nothing important. Eventually, he heard the lock click and the door opened just a crack. His daughter's face appeared streaked with tears, her hair a mess. "Can you read me a story?" she asked in a small voice. Of course. They curled up together in her bed, surrounded by stuffed animals and discarded clothes. Richard read from a book about a brave princess who went on adventures, and his daughter slowly fell asleep against his shoulder. In these quiet moments, she was still his little girl, still the child who used to laugh and play and fill their home with joy. He kissed her forehead and carefully extracted himself from the bed, covering her with her favorite blanket. As he stood in the doorway looking at her sleeping form, he made a silent promise. This had to work. This Diana Cooper, whoever she was, had to be the answer, because he was running out of options and running out of hope. The house felt huge and empty as he walked back downstairs. Rooms that used to echo with life now stood silent. He poured himself a drink and sat in the dark living room, surrounded by expensive furniture and artwork that meant nothing. Tomorrow morning, a stranger would walk through his door, the 16th person to try to help his daughter. He didn't know if Diana Cooper would be any different from the others. Didn't know if anyone could reach his daughter through the walls of grief and anger she'd built around herself, but he had to try. Because giving up wasn't an option, not when it came to his little girl. Richard finished his drink and headed to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. It never did anymore. He lay awake thinking about the daughter who used to greet him with hugs and now greeted him with tantrums. Thinking about the wife who would have known exactly what to do. Thinking about how money and success and everything he'd worked so hard to build couldn't solve the one problem that actually mattered. Somewhere in the house, he heard a sound. Maybe his daughter had woken up. Maybe she was crying again, or maybe it was just the old house settling, filling the silence with meaningless noise. Tomorrow would come whether he was ready or not, and with it, one last chance to find someone who could help his daughter find her way back from wherever grief had taken her. The next morning arrived too quickly. Richard had barely slept, and when he did, his dreams were filled with images of his daughter crying behind locked doors. He was up at 6 making coffee and trying to prepare himself for another day of chaos. At exactly 7:30, the doorbell rang. Richard straightened his tie and opened the door, ready to meet this Diana Cooper who was supposedly his last hope. The woman standing on his doorstep wasn't what he expected at all. She was older, maybe in her early 50s, with gray streaks running through her brown hair that she hadn't bothered to dye. She wore simple clothes, a plain blue cardigan over a white shirt, and carried an old leather bag that looked like it had seen better days. But it was her eyes that caught Richard's attention. They were tired, yes, but there was something else there, a depth of understanding that made him feel like she could see right through him. "Mr. Harrison," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "I'm Diana. The agency sent me." "Please, come in," Richard said, stepping aside. Diana walked into the house slowly, taking everything in. Her gaze moved across the expensive paintings, the designer furniture, the crystal chandelier hanging in the entryway. But she didn't look impressed or intimidated. She looked sad, like all this wealth reminded her of something painful. "Your daughter is still sleeping?" Diana asked. "Yes. She usually wakes up around 8, and that's when the trouble starts." Diana nodded and set her bag down carefully. "The agency told me about the situation. 15 caregivers in less than 2 years. That's a lot of change for a little girl who's already lost so much." Richard felt defensive suddenly. "I didn't have a choice. They all quit or couldn't handle her behavior." "I wasn't criticizing," Diana said gently. "I was just observing. Children who've experienced loss often test the people around them. They push and push, waiting to see who'll stay and who'll leave like everyone else." "You sound like the therapist," Richard muttered. "I used to be one," Diana admitted, though that feels like a lifetime ago now. Before Richard could respond, they heard it. The sound of a door opening upstairs, followed by small footsteps. His daughter appeared at the top of the stairs, still in her pajamas, her hair wild from sleep. She stopped when she saw the stranger in her house. "Who's that?" she demanded, pointing at Diana. "This is Diana," Richard said, trying to sound cheerful. "She's going to be helping us for a while." His daughter's face immediately closed off. "I don't want her here. Tell her to leave." "Sweetheart, please don't start," Richard began, but Diana held up her hand gently. "It's all right," she said. Then she looked up at his daughter and smiled slightly. "You don't want me here. I understand. You probably didn't want any of the others here either." That must be exhausting having strangers keep coming into your home. His daughter blinked, clearly not expecting this response. She didn't say anything, just stared at Diana with suspicion. I'm going to make myself some tea, Diana continued calmly. Would you like some breakfast? I can make whatever you want. Or nothing at all if you'd prefer. I don't eat breakfast, his daughter announced, crossing her arms. All right then, Diana said simply, and walked toward the kitchen. Richard followed her, confused. Aren't you going to try to convince her to eat? Why would I do that? Diana asked, filling the kettle with water. She's not hungry right now. Fighting about it will only make things worse. But she needs to eat something, the doctor said. She'll eat when she's ready, Diana interrupted gently. Children won't starve themselves. They just need to feel like they have some control over their own lives. Richard wanted to argue, but he was already late for work. He had back-to-back meetings all day, including another session with the overseas investor who wasn't happy about yesterday's missed meeting. I have to go, he said reluctantly. My number is on the fridge if you need anything. And please, if she gets too difficult, just call me. We'll be fine, Diana assured him. Richard wasn't so sure, but he didn't have time to worry about it. He grabbed his briefcase and headed out, glancing back once to see his daughter peeking around the corner, watching Diana with those cautious eyes. The drive to the office felt longer than usual. Richard kept imagining disasters happening at home. His daughter throwing things, Diana calling to quit, the whole situation falling apart before lunch. But his phone stayed silent. No calls, no emergency texts. Just an eerie quiet that made him more nervous than any crisis would have. Back at the house, Diana had finished her tea and was sitting at the kitchen table with a notebook open in front of her. She was drawing something, her hand moving steadily across the page. She didn't look up when she heard small footsteps approaching. Richard's daughter crept into the kitchen, trying to seem casual but clearly curious. She opened the refrigerator, stared at its contents without taking anything, then closed it again. She did this 3 times, each time moving a little closer to where Diana sat. What are you doing? She finally asked. Drawing, Diana said, not looking up. Drawing what? A story. The girl moved closer, unable to resist her curiosity. She peered over Diana's shoulder at the notebook. The drawing showed a little girl with dark curly hair standing alone in a big house. That looks like me, she said accusingly. Does it? Diana asked mildly. I was just drawing from my imagination. The girl studied the picture more carefully. Why is she alone? Because everyone around her keeps disappearing, Diana said quietly. First, someone very important left and never came back. Then lots of other people came and went, until she didn't know who to trust anymore. So she decided it was safer to be angry than to be sad. Anger feels stronger, doesn't it? Like armor. Richard's daughter went very still. You don't know anything about me. You're right, I don't, Diana agreed. I only know what I see in my drawings. This little girl here, she's very brave, but she's also very tired. Tired of pretending, tired of fighting, tired of being scared that everyone will leave. I'm not scared, the girl insisted, but her voice was smaller now. Diana finally looked up at her. Then you're braver than I was. When I lost someone I loved, I was terrified all the time. Still am some days. Who did you lose? Diana was quiet for a moment. My daughter. She was 16. There was an accident and she didn't make it. That was 4 years ago. The girl's eyes widened. Your daughter died too? My daughter died, Diana corrected gently. Your mother died. It's not the same situation, but the feeling is probably similar. Like there's a big empty space where they used to be and nothing fits right anymore. Richard's daughter didn't say anything, but she pulled out a chair and sat down at the table. She watched Diana draw for a while, silent and thoughtful. What happened to the girl in your story? She asked eventually. I don't know yet, Diana said. I'm still figuring it out. Maybe you could help me? I don't know how to draw. You don't have to draw, you could just tell me what happens next and I'll draw it. The girl considered this. Does she have to stop being angry? No, Diana said. Anger is okay. It's actually important sometimes. But maybe she could find other feelings too. Like sad and scared and maybe sometimes even happy. People can hold lots of different feelings at once. I don't want to be sad, the girl whispered. I know, sweetheart. Being sad hurts a lot. But you know what I learned? Being angry all the time hurts too. It's just a different kind of hurt. They sat together in silence for a while. Diana kept drawing, and the girl kept watching. Eventually, the girl's stomach growled loudly. "Maybe the girl in the story is hungry," Diana suggested casually. "What, do you think she'd like to eat?" "Pancakes," the girl said immediately, "with chocolate chips." "Does your kitchen have ingredients for pancakes with chocolate chips?" The girl nodded. "Would you like to help me make them? I'm not very familiar with this kitchen yet." And just like that, they were working together. The girl showed Diana where everything was kept, measuring out flour while Diana cracked eggs. There was no drama, no fighting, no tantrums, just a woman and a child making breakfast together while the morning sun streamed through the windows. The girl ate 3 pancakes, more than she'd eaten for breakfast in weeks. She got chocolate on her face and syrup on her pajamas, and she didn't even complain when Diana suggested she should probably get dressed for the day. "Can we draw more of the story after?" she asked. "Of course," Diana said. "The story isn't finished yet." Getting dressed was usually a battle that took over an hour, with clothes thrown everywhere and tears and shouting. But today, the girl went upstairs and came back down 20 minutes later in a purple dress that had been her mother's favorite. Diana noticed but didn't comment. Instead, she just said, "That's a lovely color on you." They settled in the living room, Diana with her notebook, and the girl with a box of crayons she'd found. Diana continued the story in pictures, and the girl added her own drawings on separate pages. The house that had been full of tension and anger suddenly felt peaceful. Around noon, Diana made sandwiches. The girl ate without being asked. She even put her plate in the sink afterward, something she never did. "Why are you being so nice to me?" the girl asked suspiciously. "Why wouldn't I be?" Diana responded. "Everyone else gets mad at me. They say I'm difficult and spoiled and impossible." Diana set down her sandwich and looked at the girl directly. "You're not impossible. You're hurt. There's a big difference. And yes, sometimes you do difficult things, but that's because you're trying to protect yourself. I understand that." The other ladies didn't understand. The other ladies were trying to do their job, Diana said. They wanted to keep the house clean and make sure you ate your vegetables and followed the rules. Those are all good things, but maybe not the most important things right now. What are the most important things? Helping you feel safe. Letting you know that it's okay to be sad and angry and scared. Showing you that some people will stay even when things are hard. The girl was quiet, processing this. "Are you going to stay?" "I'd like to," Diana said honestly. "But I can't promise forever. Nobody can promise forever. What I can promise is that I'm here today, and I'll be here tomorrow, and I'll keep showing up as long as you need me." It wasn't the answer the girl wanted, but it was an honest one. She seemed to appreciate that. The afternoon passed quietly. They worked in the garden for a while, pulling weeds from the neglected flower beds. Diana showed the girl how to tell the difference between weeds and the flowers that were trying to grow back. "Your mother planted these roses," Diana said. "Your father told me. They're still here, just waiting for someone to take care of them." The girl touched a rosebud carefully. "I remember helping her. I was little, but I remember." "Then you already know how to do this. Your hands remember, even if your mind doesn't." They watered the roses together, and the girl talked a little about her mother. Small memories, fragments of moments she'd been holding inside. Diana listened without pushing for more, letting the girl share what she was ready to share. When Richard came home that evening, he braced himself for the usual scene. Chaos, crying, complaints about the new caregiver. But instead he found his daughter and Diana sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by drawings and craft supplies, both of them focused on creating something together. "Daddy!" His daughter looked up, and for the first time in months she was smiling. Really smiling. "Look what we made. It's a story about a girl and her garden." Richard stood in the doorway, afraid to move or speak in case he broke whatever spell had been cast over his home. His daughter was happy, calm. She ran to him and hugged his legs, something she hadn't done in so long he'd almost forgotten what it felt like. "Did you have a good day?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "It was okay," she said. trying to sound casual, but she was still smiling. Diana was packing up her things quietly, giving them space. Richard walked over to her. "What did you do?" he asked quietly. "How did you get her to—" "I didn't do anything special," Diana interrupted. "I just listened, and I didn't leave when things got hard." "Things got hard?" Diana smiled slightly. "She threw a book at me around 2 o'clock, missed by about 6 inches. We talked about why she did it, and then we moved on. Children need to test boundaries, to see if you'll abandon them when they're not perfect." "I won't." Richard felt something shift in his chest. Hope, maybe, or relief, or just gratitude that someone finally understood. "Thank you," he said. "Will you come back tomorrow?" "I'll be here," Diana promised. Same time. After she left, Richard sat with his daughter and looked through all the drawings they'd made. Stories about gardens and girls who were learning to be brave in different ways. His daughter explained each picture, chattering away like she used to before grief had stolen her voice. That night, when he tucked her into bed, she didn't lock her door. She let him read her a story, and when he kissed her goodnight, she whispered something he'd been waiting months to hear. "I miss Mommy, Daddy." "I know, baby. I miss her too." Diana says it's okay to miss her, that it means we loved her a lot. Diana's right. His daughter yawned, her eyes already closing. "Diana's nice. I hope she doesn't leave like the others." "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." Richard left her room and leaned against the hallway wall, finally allowing himself to breathe. It had been one day, just one day, but for the first time since his wife died, he felt like maybe, just maybe, they were going to be okay. He didn't know that Diana had spent the night in her car again, parked in the far corner of his property where no one would notice. Didn't know that she'd used the last of her money to buy the art supplies they'd used that day. Didn't know how much this job meant to her, not just for the income, but because helping his daughter helped Diana heal a little bit too. All he knew was that tomorrow, Diana would come back. And that was enough for now. 3 weeks passed, and Richard couldn't believe the transformation happening in his home. His daughter still had difficult moments, still had days where the grief overwhelmed her and she lashed out. But those moments were becoming less frequent, less intense. More importantly, she was starting to heal. Diana came every morning at 7:30, and his daughter would actually get up to meet her at the door. They'd spend the day working in the garden, drawing their ongoing story, or just talking. Real conversations, not the one-word answers Richard had gotten used to receiving. The house felt different, too. There was life in it again. Diana had slowly been tidying up, but in a gentle way. She didn't throw anything out without asking first. She helped his daughter organize her room, letting her decide what to keep and what to donate. The kitchen, once a battlefield, was now a place where they baked cookies and made soup from scratch. Richard found himself coming home earlier from work, eager to see what they'd accomplished that day. His daughter would run to show him their latest project, whether it was a painted flower pot or a new chapter in their picture story. The anger that had filled her eyes for so long was slowly being replaced by something softer. But Richard was starting to notice other things too. Small details that didn't quite add up. Diana never talked about her life outside of work. She never mentioned going home to cook dinner or watch television or do whatever people did in the evenings. She never complained about traffic or parking or any of the usual things his previous employees had mentioned. And her clothes, while always clean, were the same few items rotating over and over. One morning, Richard arrived at his office to find he'd forgotten an important file at home. He turned around and drove back, arriving at the house around 10. He parked in his usual spot and was walking toward the front door when he noticed something strange. There was a car parked at the far end of the property, near the old equipment shed that hadn't been used in years. An old sedan that looked like it had seen better days. Richard frowned. They weren't expecting any deliveries, and Diana didn't drive to work. The agency always sent their people in company cars. Curious, he walked toward the vehicle. As he got closer, he could see blankets in the back seat. A pillow, a small bag of what looked like toiletries. His stomach dropped as understanding hit him. Richard knocked on the car window even though no one was inside. He peered through the glass and saw more evidence. A jacket folded neatly on the passenger seat. A book, a bottle of water. Someone was living in this car. His mind raced. It had to be Diana. But why? The agency paid their employees well. He knew because he paid the agency's fees and they weren't cheap. Richard headed into the house through the back door, his mind spinning. He could hear his daughter's laughter coming from the living room. He stood in the hallway for a moment listening. Diana was reading something aloud in a funny voice and his daughter was giggling uncontrollably. He walked into the room and they both looked up, startled. "Daddy, you're home early." His daughter jumped up, clearly happy to see him. "I forgot something for work," Richard said, his eyes on Diana. She'd gone very still, her expression careful. "Diana, could I speak with you in my office for a moment?" "Of course, Mr. Harrison." His daughter looked between them, sensing something was wrong. "Is Diana in trouble?" "No, sweetheart," Richard assured her quickly. "I just need to talk to her about boring grown-up stuff." "Why don't you keep working on that picture? We'll be right back." In his office, Richard closed the door and turned to face Diana. She stood with her hands clasped in front of her, waiting. "There's a car parked on my property," Richard said quietly. "An old blue sedan near the equipment shed." "Is that yours?" Diana's face went pale. For a moment she said nothing. Then she nodded slowly. "Yes, it's mine. Are you living in it?" The silence stretched between them. Diana's shoulders sagged slightly and she suddenly looked much older and more tired. "Yes," she whispered, "I am." Richard felt anger flash through him, but not at Diana, at himself, at the situation, at the agency that had sent her here. "How long?" "About 8 months now. Since I lost my apartment." "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you ask for help?" Diana looked up at him and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Because I needed this job, Mr. Harrison. Your daughter needs consistency, needs someone who'll stay. If you knew I was homeless, would you have kept me? Would you have trusted me with your child?" Richard ran his hand through his hair, frustrated. "I don't know. Maybe not at first." "But Diana, you've been sleeping in your car in my parking area for 3 weeks." "I have a membership at a gym 2 miles from here," Diana said quickly. "I shower there every morning before I come to work. I keep my clothes clean. I would never put your daughter at risk or—" "That's not what I'm worried about," Richard interrupted. "I'm worried about you. It's almost winter. The temperatures are dropping at night. You can't keep living like this." "I don't have much choice," Diana said, her voice barely audible. "I lost my house after I lost my practice. Lost my practice after my daughter died because I couldn't focus, couldn't help anyone when I couldn't even help myself. I've been trying to rebuild, but rent around here is expensive, and with my history, most landlords won't take a chance on me." Richard sat down heavily in his desk chair. "Where does your paycheck go?" Diana hesitated, then seemed to decide there was no point in hiding anything now. "I buy things for your daughter. Art supplies, gardening tools, books, things she needs for healing. The agency pays me, but after they take their cut, there's not enough left for rent and those supplies. So I chose the supplies." "You chose my daughter over having a place to live," Richard said slowly, trying to process this. "She needed help more than I needed a roof," Diana said simply. "I've survived worse. But she's 7 years old and she's hurting. I couldn't just let her hurt when I had the ability to help her." Richard stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where his daughter had spent so many happy hours with Diana these past weeks. The roses were blooming again, healthier than they'd been since his wife died. His daughter was blooming too, coming back to life. "You're fired," he said quietly. He heard Diana's sharp intake of breath behind him. "Mr. Harrison, please. I know I should have told you, but please don't." Richard turned around. "You're fired as an employee of the agency. I'm terminating their contract effective immediately, but I'd like to hire you directly if you're willing, with a proper salary, not whatever pittance they were paying you, and you'll live in the guest house. It's been empty since my wife's mother moved out 2 years ago. It has a bedroom, bathroom, small kitchen. It's not huge, but it's better than a car." Diana stared at him, her mouth slightly open. "I don't understand." "You've given my daughter her life back," Richard said, his voice rough with emotion. "You've slept in your car and spent your own money to help her heal. The least I can do is provide you with a decent place to live and fair compensation, unless you'd rather not work here anymore." "No," Diana said quickly. "No, I want to stay. Your daughter, she's special. Helping her, it's helped me too. I just never expected, neither did I, Richard admitted. But here we are. So what do you say? Will you stay? As a proper member of this household, not just hired help? Diana's tears finally spilled over. She nodded, unable to speak. Good, Richard said. I'll have the guest house cleaned and ready for you by this evening. In the meantime, please go get your things from your car. And Diana? No more sleeping in parking areas. If you ever need something, you ask. Understood? Understood, Diana managed to say. Thank you, Mr. Harrison, thank you so much. Call me Richard, he said. If you're going to be part of this family, we should probably use first names. They walked back out to the living room together. His daughter looked up anxiously from her drawing. Is everything okay? She asked. Everything's perfect, Richard said, sitting down beside her. In fact, I have some good news. Diana is going to be staying with us for a long time. She's going to live in Grandma's old house in the backyard. His daughter's face lit up like Christmas morning. Really? You mean she won't have to leave every night? That's right. His daughter threw her arms around Diana. You're staying. You're really staying. Diana hugged her back, tears still streaming down her face. I'm staying, sweetheart. I promise. Richard watched them, feeling something warm bloom in his chest. His home was becoming a home again. Not the same as before, not the same as when his wife was alive, but something new, something healing. That evening, Richard helped Diana move her meager belongings from her car to the guest house. It didn't take long. Everything she owned fit in 2 bags and a small box. As she looked around the clean, warm space that would be hers, she started crying again. I'm sorry, she said, wiping her eyes. I'm not usually this emotional. It's just been so long since I had a real place to live. Since I felt safe. You're safe here, Richard assured her. And tomorrow we're going shopping. You need furniture, linens, proper kitchen supplies. Consider it part of your compensation package. That's too much, Diana protested. It's not enough, Richard countered. Not for what you've done for my daughter. For us. Over the next few days, they settled into a new routine. Diana would wake up in her little house, make herself coffee in her own kitchen, and walk across the garden to the main house. His daughter would be waiting, excited to show Diana something or tell her about a dream or start their day together. Richard found himself joining them more often. He'd rearranged his schedule, delegating more at work, coming home for lunch sometimes. He wanted to be present, wanted to be part of this healing process. One afternoon, he found Diana and his daughter in the garden, working on the rose beds. His wife's roses were thriving now, full of blooms in pink and red and white. Mommy would be happy, his daughter said quietly, touching a pink rose gently. She loved these flowers. She did, Richard agreed, kneeling beside her. She spent hours out here. Diana says flowers are like feelings, his daughter continued. Even when they look dead in winter, they're still alive underneath. They're just resting, waiting for the right time to grow again. Richard looked at Diana, who was watching them with a soft expression. Diana's very wise, he said. I'm not wise, Diana said with a slight smile. I just know about waiting. I spent a long time feeling dead inside after my daughter passed. But being here, helping you both, it's like I'm blooming again too. His daughter walked over to Diana and took her hand. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you didn't leave like the others. I'm not going anywhere, Diana promised. Richard realized in that moment how much had changed. 3 weeks ago, his daughter had been angry and unreachable. Diana had been homeless and broken. He'd been drowning in guilt and helplessness. Now somehow they were all healing together. It wasn't perfect. His daughter still had nightmares sometimes. Diana still looked sad when she thought no one was watching. Richard still felt the ache of his wife's absence. But they were facing it together now, supporting each other through the difficult moments. That night, after his daughter was asleep, Richard walked out to the guest house. Diana was sitting on her small porch reading by lamplight. Do you have a minute? He asked. Of course, Richard sat down on the porch steps. I wanted to thank you. Really thank you. Not just for helping my daughter, but for teaching me something important. What's that? That healing isn't something you can buy or force. It's something that happens when someone cares enough to stay, even when it's hard, even when there's no guarantee it'll work out. You did that for us, and I'll never forget it. Diana set her book aside. You gave me a second chance, Richard. After everything I'd lost, I thought my life was over. Thought I'd never be able to help anyone again. Never be able to do the work I loved. But you trusted me with your daughter. Gave me a home, made me feel valuable again. So really, we saved each other. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the crickets chirp and watching the stars come out. Inside the main house, Richard's daughter slept peacefully, no longer locking her door. In her dreams, she walked through gardens full of roses with her mother, and when she woke up, she knew Diana would be there, ready to help her face another day. Things were far from perfect. There were still hard days ahead, but for the first time in 2 years, this broken family was beginning to piece itself back together. Not in the same shape as before, but in a new shape, one that included a woman who'd lost everything but found her purpose again in helping a hurting child heal. And in the quiet of the evening, that felt like enough. More than enough. It felt like hope. 6 months had passed since Diana moved into the guest house, and life had settled into something Richard never thought possible. His daughter was thriving. She'd returned to school after being homeschooled for a year, and her teachers reported she was doing well, making friends, participating in class. The angry, unreachable child who'd driven away 15 caregivers was now a girl who smiled, who laughed, who was learning to live with her grief instead of being consumed by it. But it was a Tuesday afternoon when everything changed again. Richard was in his home office, reviewing quarterly reports when his phone rang. It was his accountant, calling about something unusual in the household expenses. "I'm just doing the routine audit," George explained. "And I noticed some discrepancies, large purchases that don't match up with the invoices, art supplies, gardening equipment, books, therapeutic toys. The amounts are significant, Richard. Over the past 6 months, there's been almost $15,000 spent." Richard frowned. "That doesn't sound right. Diana and I discussed a budget for those things. It should be maybe $2,000–3,000 at most. Well, someone's been spending a lot more than that. I wanted to flag it before it became a bigger problem." After he hung up, Richard sat staring at his computer screen. He trusted Diana completely. She'd proven herself over and over. But $15,000 was serious money even for him. He needed to understand what was happening. That evening, after his daughter was in bed, Richard walked over to the guest house. Diana was at her small desk working on something by lamplight. She looked up when he knocked, smiling warmly. "Richard, come in. Is everything all right?" He stepped inside, suddenly feeling uncomfortable. "I need to ask you about something. The household accounts show some large purchases over the past few months. Art supplies, books, equipment. My accountant says it's about $15,000. Diana's smile faded. She looked down at her hands. "I can explain." "I'd appreciate that," Richard said, trying to keep his tone neutral. Diana stood up and went to a drawer, pulling out a folder. She handed it to him. Inside were receipts carefully organized and labeled. But they weren't for his household. They were for something else entirely. 7 months ago, Diana began quietly, "I started thinking about all the children out there like your daughter. Kids who've lost parents, who are struggling with grief, who don't have access to the kind of help she's received. I kept thinking about my own daughter and how I couldn't save her. But maybe I could help save others." Richard looked through the receipts. Art supplies, yes, but they'd been donated to a children's grief counseling center. Books on child psychology, donated to a local library. Therapeutic toys sent to foster care agencies. "I've been using my salary," Diana continued, "every penny of it, to help other children. I thought, if I could just reach a few more kids, give them the tools they need to heal like your daughter is healing, then maybe—" Her voice broke slightly. "Maybe my daughter's death wouldn't feel so meaningless." "Diana," Richard said slowly, "this is admirable, but these receipts show way more than your salary. Where did the rest of the money come from?" Diana was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I sold my car, the one I was living in. It wasn't worth much, but it gave me about $8,000. And I've been selling things online. Jewelry my daughter left behind. Some furniture I had in storage, anything I could part with. I thought if I could just help enough children." "You sold everything you had left," Richard said, his voice rough. "Everything that connected you to your daughter." "Things are just things," Diana whispered. "But children are living, breathing souls who need help. Your daughter taught me that. She showed me I still had something to give, even after losing everything. I couldn't just keep that gift to myself." Richard sat down heavily on her couch. He looked at the receipts again, really seeing them this time. Donations to children's hospitals, supplies for school counselors, books for kids who couldn't afford therapy. Diana had created an entire network of support all on her own, using money she could barely spare. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. "Because this wasn't about recognition or reward. It was about doing what I could with what I had. And honestly, I was afraid you might think I was being irresponsible with money, that you might not trust me anymore." Richard looked up at her, this woman who'd given up everything to help children she'd never meet. "Diana, what you've done is incredible. But you can't keep sacrificing yourself like this. You need to rebuild your own life too." "Helping others is rebuilding my life," Diana said simply. "For the first time since my daughter died, I feel like I have a purpose again." Richard stood up, his mind racing. He walked to the window, looking out at the dark garden. An idea was forming, something bigger than he'd initially imagined. "What if we did this properly?" he said, turning back to her. "What if instead of you selling your possessions and working alone, we created something real? A foundation, maybe. A program specifically for children dealing with grief." Diana's eyes widened. "Richard, I couldn't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. My wife and I always talked about doing something meaningful with our money. Something beyond just accumulating wealth. She wanted to help children. She would have loved this idea. But a foundation, that's enormous. That's exactly what we should be doing," Richard interrupted.
"Diana, you've shown me something important."
"Money sitting in accounts doesn't help anyone. But money put into action, combined with genuine care and expertise, can change lives. You have the expertise. I have the resources. Why shouldn't we combine them?" Diana sat down slowly, overwhelmed. "I don't even know where we'd start." "I do," Richard said, his excitement growing. "We start with what you've already been doing, but we expand it. We create a proper grief counseling program for children. We hire trained counselors, art therapists, grief specialists. We provide services for free to families who can't afford them. We train caregivers and teachers to recognize and support grieving children. We make it big enough to actually make a difference. That would cost. I know what it would cost. And I can afford it. The question is, will you help me do this right? Will you be the heart of this program, the way you've been the heart of my daughter's healing?" Diana's eyes filled with tears. "You'd really do this? Create an entire program?" "We'd do this," Richard corrected. "Together. You'd be the director, the one who shapes how we help these children. I'd handle the business side, the funding, the logistics. We'd call it," he paused, thinking. "What was your daughter's name?" "Hannah," Diana whispered. "Her name was Hannah. Then we'd call it Hannah's Hope, a program dedicated to helping children navigate grief and loss." "What do you think?" Diana couldn't speak. She just nodded, tears streaming down her face. Over the next few weeks, Richard threw himself into making the foundation a reality. He met with lawyers to set up the nonprofit structure. He consulted with child psychologists and grief counselors about best practices. He found a building in town, a warm, welcoming space that could house the program. Diana worked alongside him, designing the programs, determining what services they'd offer, figuring out how to reach the children who needed help most. Her background as a psychologist proved invaluable. She knew exactly what grieving children needed because she'd been one herself, and she'd raised one, and she'd helped one heal. Richard's daughter was involved too. She helped pick out paint colors for the center, chose books for the library, even suggested they have a garden like the one at home. "Plants help you feel better," she explained seriously to the contractors. "They teach you that things can grow again, even after they look dead." One evening, about 2 months into the planning, Richard and Diana sat in what would become the main counseling room. The space was still empty, walls freshly painted a soft blue, but Richard could see Diana envisioning what it would become. "I never imagined this," Diana said quietly. "When I was living in my car, eating dollar store food, wondering if I'd ever have a purpose again, I never could have imagined something like this." "You created it," Richard said. "You planted the seed with your compassion and sacrifice. I'm just helping it grow." "We're helping it grow," Diana corrected with a smile, "just like we helped your daughter grow." "Speaking of which," Richard said, "she asked,